This is a devil's coach horse beetle, capable of destabilizing my entire ecosystem. However, there is a very good reason for why I added him to my thriving terrarium. It all began with one slug which snuck into my terrarium. This is a greenhouse slug, and it may not look it, but this slug poses a serious threat to the ecosystem. Slugs are primarily herbivores, which puts all my plants at risk, but most dangerously of all, they can clone themselves. Soon enough, this would become a huge problem. However, something else was spreading uncontrollably. The submerged portion of my terrarium was completely overgrown. In an attempt to counteract this, I added Neocaridina shrimp. Not only would they eat decaying plant matter, but they would also redistribute the sandy substrate and clear the glass. Heading back up to the surface, it is almost time to introduce an apex predator. This is because the greenhouse slugs are hermaphrodites, meaning they can reproduce via asexual reproduction, and they would not stop cloning. The slugs were taking over. If this continued, all the plants would soon be gone. It was time to take action in order to save the terrarium. I began by spacing out the plants, then thickening the substrate, and finally adding new plants. But one of the plants had to go. The striped begonia was outgrowing the terrarium, getting exposed to too much sunlight and not enough water. I took it out and discovered it was also home to a bumblebee millipede, which climbed into some moss in search of a new home. I replaced it with a parlor palm, the new centerpiece for the Paludarium, and planted the begonia outside. And after all this, it was time to add the devil's coach horse beetle, the largest species of rove beetle, believed by the Irish in the Middle Ages to be the incarnation of the devil. Its body is akin to a scorpion, with powerful jaws that deliver a painful bite even to humans. The beetle's favourite snack is slugs. However, instead of the slugs, he went to scope out the sphagnum moss, the same moss which the bumblebee millipede had recently called home. And soon enough, the beetle attacked. The bumblebee millipede narrowly escaped, having detached its tail to defend itself. This independent segment would continue to wriggle around, distracting the devil's coach horse beetle, allowing the millipede to crawl away. This is a process known as autotomy, and the millipede can regenerate these lost segments. As the devil's coach horse beetle was seemingly ignoring the slugs, I also added 8 black ground beetles and 1 violet ground beetle. Hopefully, these would be more willing to eat the slugs. I added some cucumber near the sword fern to lure out the slugs. Unfortunately, the devil's coach horse beetle had other ideas. The coach horse beetle attacked a black ground beetle, seemingly not satisfied with the millipede. It easily took it down, using its abdomen to secrete a foul-smelling odor. The Paludarium was no longer a paradise, but instead a true encapsulation of the harsh rainforest. Later that night at around 2 in the morning, I was awoken to a scraping sound coming from the enclosure. The beetles had congregated at the top of the terrarium and were rubbing their elytras against the wire mesh. I soon spotted a hole for the pump's wire and freaked out because I thought the beetles were trying to escape through it, so I went a bit overboard with defensive measures. Over the following days, the beetles settled into their new home. I gave them some dried insects, which the beetles individually took away and snacked on. The terrarium was really starting to come together. But there was one last problem. When the substrate was first assembled, a water pump was placed in at the back of the terrarium to circulate the water. However, this pump had stopped working. This meant that mold started to grow underwater and the shrimps were in danger. As a temporary fix, I added a solar-powered water pump to the front of the aquarium, which worked but wasn't too effective. It seemed there was only one solution, and it involved digging down to the pump. Once the pump was reached, we added some new tubing and created a water stream coming out from one of the rocks. This fixed the circulation problem, so we could now add new fish. Joking, those were in a fish shop, unfortunately. But I did add cardinal tetras, zebra nerite snails, and ottocinclus catfish. The snails would clean the glass, the catfish would clean everything else, and the tetras would illuminate the caves. And finally, the terrarium was thriving. Well, that is until the geckos arrive.